long rides, I think a lot of the time, so I guess there's a psychological benefit too that a person could get from knowing that they could go that long. But I would tell, if you are at that situation where you haven't ridden that long before, chances are it's going to take quite a toll on you physically. Probably. And I would say trust yourself and what you can do for 3 hours. You'll be surprised how far you can stretch that.
Yeah. So if you put yourself in a position where you can ride this fast for 2 hours, you don't have to trim off much intensity to be able to extend that 2 hours to 3 hours to 4 hours to 5 hours. And I think that's maybe what's going on here is he's trying to do this intensity that he could do for 2.5 hours, and he's trying to magically grow it 3 or 4 hours, and it's overwhelming him because this is new territory. This is not something he's dealt with. You can't just magically take your top level fitness and add a couple hours to it and expect your body to deal with it.
Yeah, cramping. That's when cramping happens. And yes, there are other things that could contribute to it. If you aren't hydrated properly, if you don't have sodium on board,
plenty of possibilities. Yeah,
you don't have all those things. They can all contribute to it. But I can guarantee you, the best way to make yourself cramp is to push beyond your abilities.
Yeah, and
make sure it's intense. And
and that's it. That's it. Because single track 6, in my preparation for that, and both Lost and Found, which both of those wrecked me with cramps.
It was, the cramps at Lost and Found were otherworldly.
Oh yeah, and that was a long day and a hard day. But single track 6 were just hard days. They weren't exceptionally long. They were like 3.5, maybe 4 hour races. Yeah, and I was doing 5.5, 6 hour water rides, nourished rides, whatever. But I was spending a lot of time in the saddle. So. Obviously, it wasn't that I couldn't handle that much time in the saddle or pedaling that long. It was because those races were hard. Yes. And you're going up a single track and you got people in front of you and people on behind you. You hang on to whatever pace that audience or that set of riders is dictating and just hope for the best.
Yes. Here's another way to look at it. If you have a longer race, well, first of all, a race is always going to push yourself. You're going to push your limits, right? Yeah. And if you have a longer race, you have more time on course. This is crazy, mind-breaking math right here, right? Longer race, more time on course equals more opportunities to be able to overreach.
Yeah, go hard.
Yep.
Right.
And that's and so a lot of the time we equate it with, it's just the duration. It was too long. In almost every case, it's no, you're just riding at an intensity that you can't sustain. Yeah. Like that's, and that doesn't mean that you ride at a sustained intensity the whole time. That could be because you tried to bridge for 7 times to different groups.
Yeah, and races are
it's just too
dynamic.
Much, right?
And it could have been an hour ago that you did the problem, and that turns into a cramp an hour later.
You cramped in a 55-minute crit the other day.
I actually. So reading this question made us laugh, and so I went back and I'm not a cramper. I barely ever cramp. But I looked up the last handful of times that I've cramped, and pretty much I was always at my maximum limit for like the previous 30 to 45 minutes, and that seems to be what sets me up for cramping, is going 100% as hard as I can possibly go for 30, 45 minutes, and then all of a sudden I can't pedal anymore.
Amazing, right? Amazing how that happens.
You push boundaries. I mean, this sort of thing happens.
So, I mean, the way to curb this is to really make sure that you're, especially on long races, like Leadville, it was just, we talked about this last week, but it's amazing to see how many people were riding so far outside of their limits so early on. It's not necessary, right? Yeah. Like, and in fact, I would say it's necessary to do the opposite, to pace yourself well. Pacing yourself well, making sure that you have adequate training leading into something like this for the pacing plan that you're going to do. Yep. That is the best way, in my mind, to avoid cramping.
Yeah, you have to be realistic. If you know what you can do for 3 hours and you're going to go out and try to do that for 4 hours, you got to expect some fallout. It's not going to work that tidily, I promise.
But you don't have to turn it down a whole lot to be able to stretch that to 4 hours. No, and that's the beauty of it.
So if you know what you can do for 3 hours, then if you do 90% of that, it's very reasonable to expect you can do that for 4 hours, maybe 5 hours.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah, and this is an instance that really drives home the point of being able to vary your intensity. And if you work through our base build and specialty cycles, once you get into the specialty rides, the specialty workouts, you'll start to see a lot of combination in the intervals because of this very thing. I mean, races seldom take place at a single pace. I mean, if you're riding a century and you can go super steady, or you're doing a triathlon and you go super steady, and that's reflected in those specialty workouts. But when it comes to mass start racing or criteriums, road races, mountain bike races, you have to be able to go from high intensity back to moderate intensity up to extremely high intensity. I mean, you're bouncing all over the place for hours on end. And if you're unfamiliar with that sort of stress too, I mean, it's really hard to get a handle on that unless you've exposed yourself to those very things, those combinations.
Yeah. This is like a long-term cure to cramps, whereas a very short-term cure to
physical
cramps
preparation
is pickle juice, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, and don't go so hard.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like that's a cure for cramps.
Yes.
Don't go so hard.
That's a long-term one.
Yeah.
That's one you can rely on, right? And I feel like it's one that, and like we said, there are plenty of factors that can contribute to cramps, but if you are pacing properly for your abilities and for what you've trained for coming in, you're going to set yourself up to have a much less lower likelihood of cramps.
I'm the cramp king, or I have been, and I can trace every one of my cramping instances back to where I just went above and beyond. I can look at it and say, there's no way I was doing enough training to be able to do that day after day, or hour after hour.
Yep, and it can be a position change. It doesn't have to just be, something like that. Yeah. It can just, you're working in a foreign environment one way or another, right? Whether it's by intensity.
It's a muscle stimulus that your muscles are not accustomed to.
Yep. It could be heat, could be position, could be pace, could be all those things, but it's basically working outside yourself. Hey, I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Pete.
And if you like this video, you should subscribe to our channel because there's a lot more where that came from, and you can give it a thumbs up.
Yeah, if there's something you didn't like, give it a thumbs down. And if you would have done something differently, let us know in the comments below.
Absolutely. And if you want to become a faster cyclist, you should head over to TrainerRoad.com. It works. That's how Pete's fast.
Yeah, 100%.